there was no NATO-Russia Council meeting as had been hoped, and there was some desire to show the Russians that that there were some common interests that we have, and that we did want to continue to work in a cooperative way on. There were about eight or nine different areas of cooperation that were identified at the Lisbon summit that President Medvedev did attend and did announce that Russia wanted to work with us, beginning with the continuation of the so-called Northern Distribution Network to supply NATO forces in Afghanistan, but also work on counterterrorism, on counter-piracy, on other issues affecting the broader international security, and missile defense as another key area that they were willing to work with on the idea of cooperative. What NATO proposed was a sort of cooperative parallel missile defense systems that would share warning data and information about the emerging threat. Well, it turned out missile defense became a more contentious issue because of some Russian concerns that the missile defense system that NATO was developing, which was the U.S. and others was noting was designed to counter threats from the Middle East, particularly potentially Iran, which is the one country that is developing these long-range ballistic missiles, medium-range and longer-range ballistic missiles. But the Russians feared that the beginnings of this system might grow to a level that it could actually threaten their deterrent. And they were seeking certain assurances from the U.S. and other NATO countries that were agreeing to deploy these systems about how that system was going to unfold. The U.S. has said it's open to that, but it isn't willing to undertake a treaty commitment to specifically set limits by treaty on missile defense. But that's a dialogue that's going to continue, I hope, and we'll see where things go now. On other areas, though, I do think that the Russians have shown they are willing to continue cooperation, particularly on Afghanistan, where they do see their interests affected and in a positive way by the NATO presence in Afghanistan. That is, to the extent to which NATO is in maintaining stability there, preventing extremist groups from gaining a foothold, because those groups that are operating now in Afghanistan and Pakistan could just as easily be operating into Central Asia and parts of Russia. They're concerned about that. And it was ironic that despite their anti-NATO rhetoric in the campaign, right after the presidential inauguration, both President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov were in the position of having to justify to critics in Russia why Russia was still allowing this big air base in central Russia to be used to supply NATO forces. The communists and some others were criticizing them for accepting this. And ironically, both President Medvedev, President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov were out there defending this and saying this is in Russia's interest because NATO is helping to prevent some of these threats from reaching Russian territory. So it's a good thing that we're out there helping Russia, that we're helping the NATO countries. So that was actually a very positive and ironic outcome of all of this, that you actually had in the midst of this uproar within Russia, that their leadership had to be a bit more candid with them about, well, why NATO wasn't really such a bad thing or a completely bad thing, that in fact there were some useful things that NATO was doing. And this is really how the U.S. and NATO allies have been trying to turn the debate for the last decade. We've been trying to say, Russia, we don't see you as a threat. We are not building preparations, assuming an inevitable Russian threat. What we're trying to do is build a level of confidence with you so that we can show that, NATO's enlargement and NATO's efforts to protect all of its current members do not threaten Russia, and we have no intent of threatening Russia. And it's not primarily or only hedging against the idea that Russia might be once again emerging as a threat. It's trying to build towards a future where we hope Russia will be a partner, and as it has been in Afghanistan. And that's really the message we've been trying to get across. Unfortunately, there are a lot of vested interest in Russia who have a vested interest in a confrontational relationship with the West.